Today's story is about a guy who gets robbed by his own brother in the middle of the night. 20 grand, wire transferred to a crypto exchange, gone before sunrise. When he tried to call the police, his own dad shut it down, told him to eat the loss, said, "Family helps family." What his dad didn't know, and this is the part that got me, is that the money his brother stole wasn't even his. It was Dad's secret retirement fund. And this guy? He smiled, because he realized the game had just changed completely. Buckle up. This one has layers. My younger brother emptied my savings account. Dad said, "Just ignore it. You have plenty of money." I didn't call the police. I just smiled, because that wasn't my personal savings. It was Dad's secret retirement fund. I'm Nolan. I'm 34. I work as a financial analyst during the day, and I do private accounting on the side for a handful of clients. Tax season for me isn't a deadline. It's basically a month where sleep becomes optional and coffee becomes a food group. It was a Tuesday in mid-April. I was in my home office surrounded by stacks of client receipts and 3 empty mugs. The kind of situation where you stop noticing the mess because you've been inside it for 12 days straight. The only light in the room came from my dual monitors. It was 2:15 a.m. My eyes felt like sandpaper. I was about to shut everything down and call it a night when my phone buzzed on the desk. That aggressive, rapid-fire vibration that usually means something's actually wrong. I glanced at it expecting a client panic email. It was a bank notification. Wire transfer initiated, minus $20,000. Recipient, crypto_X. I stared at the screen. My brain was running on fumes, and it took a solid 10 seconds to process the number. Then I sat up straight. The fatigue just vanished. Cold spike of adrenaline right through the chest. I grabbed the mouse and logged into the banking portal. My fingers were hitting the wrong keys, shaking, forcing me to retype my password twice. The dashboard loaded. The balance on the account ending in 4490, my high-yield savings, was $42.18. My first instinct was identity theft. Some stranger halfway across the world who'd cracked my firewall. I pulled up the router and server access logs immediately. It's my job to track money, so I knew exactly where to look. I was ready to see an overseas proxy IP. Instead, I saw a device name. Brendan's MacBook Pro. I stopped breathing. Literally stopped breathing. I stared at that name until the letters started to blur. Brendan, my younger brother, had been staying at my parents' house for the past 3 months after his landlord kicked him out. My parents live about 20 minutes away. 6 months ago, at Thanksgiving, I'd given Brendan my Wi-Fi password. His laptop must have auto-connected to my network remotely. I dug deeper. Remote desktop logs. He'd used a remote access tool to get into my machine, probably guessed my password. I'd stupidly used a variation of our childhood dog's name for my personal login, and wired the money to a crypto exchange. My brother stole 20 grand from me. The rage that followed wasn't hot. It was ice cold. It started in my stomach and spread to my fingertips. I didn't throw anything. I just picked up my phone and called him. It rang and rang. Finally, a groggy voice. "Hello? Brendan?" My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Calm, almost mechanical. "Did you enjoy the transfer?" Dead silence. Then rustling, like he was sitting up in bed. He played dumb for about 30 seconds before I told him I had the IP logs, his device name, the exact timestamp, all of it. His tone shifted instantly, from denial to defensiveness. That's Brendan's signature move in every confrontation he's ever been in. He said he didn't steal it, he borrowed it. He had a sure thing. Some new coin going to the moon. He was going to put it back before I even woke up. Trust him. I told him to transfer it back now. He couldn't. He'd already locked it in a smart contract for 24 hours. But by tomorrow night, it'd be 40 grand, and he'd give me 25 back. I hung up. I was already hovering my finger over the keypad to dial 911 when my phone rang again. Not the police. Dad. Brendan, coward that he is, had already run down the hall and woken Dad up before I could do anything. Dad's voice was firm, sleep-rough, and certain. "Don't call the police. He stole $20,000. He hacked my computer." "I know. He told me. He panicked. He made a mistake." Then came the line, I'll never forget. You are not going to ruin your brother's life over money. I told him I was calling the cops. If you call the police, Dad said, his voice dropping an octave, you will never step foot in this house again. He is your brother. Family helps family. Get in your car and come here. We will fix this. I stood there in the dark office, the empty account balance still glowing on the screen. And then I thought about something. Something specific. I thought about which account Brendan had actually drained. Okay, I said. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I grabbed my keys. I didn't call the cops. Not because I was scared, because as I walked to my car, I remembered exactly what that account was. And I realized neither Dad nor Brendan had any idea. Hold on a second. Let me jump in. For the listeners, this is the host, not Nolan. His brother, Captain Crypto, just robbed his own family using a remote access tool he secretly installed months ago. Didn't stumble into it, planned it. And when he got caught, his first move was to pitch a moonshot coin like he's running a Discord pump and dump. The man committed a felony and immediately pivoted to a sales presentation. But here's what nobody in that house knows yet. The money wasn't even Nolan's to begin with. That detail is about to make everything worse for everyone except Nolan. Keep going. To understand why I smiled instead of panicking on that drive over, you have to understand the history of that account. I've always been the responsible one in the family. Boring, according to Brendan. College, finance degree, CPA, steady job, 401k, the whole package. Brendan was the wild spirit. That's what Mom always called him. He dropped out of college to start a dropshipping business. Failed. Tried day trading. Failed. Tried being an influencer. That one failed so spectacularly, it still gets brought up at family dinners. Every single time he crashed, Dad was right there with the fire extinguisher and the checkbook. Caleb's learning. Give him a break. He just needs one good idea. But 2 years ago, something shifted. Dad had inherited a plot of scrubland in Texas from a great aunt nobody really thought about. Turned out an oil company needed to run a pipeline through it. Dad sold it quietly, netted around $150,000 after taxes. Didn't tell Mom. Definitely didn't tell Brendan. He called me. He took me out to lunch at a steakhouse, something he almost never did. Ordered a coffee, looked me in the eye across the table, and slid a check toward me. I need a favor, Nolan, he said. I looked at the check. That's my retirement. My real retirement. Not the pittance your mother and I have in the joint account. He leaned in and lowered his voice. If your mother finds out, she'll renovate the kitchen or book a cruise. If Brendan finds out, he shuddered and didn't finish the sentence. He wanted me to open an account under my name. Manage it. Keep it safe and quiet. He'd give me 5% of the interest as a management fee. On paper, it'd look like my personal savings. I trust you, he said. You're the smart one. That was the hook. I'd been waiting to hear that line from him my whole life. I did it. I opened the high-yield savings account under my name and nicknamed it Project T in my personal ledger. Over 2 years, Dad had dipped into it a few times for what he called emergencies, but mostly it just sat and grew. By mid-April, the account had about $20,000 in liquid cash. The rest I had locked in long-term bonds. My actual personal savings were at a completely different bank, specifically to avoid mixing funds. I'd been deliberate about that separation from day one. Brendan, being lazy and in a rush, had grabbed the liquid cash. He thought he was stealing from me. Dad thought he was protecting Brendan from consequences of stealing from me. Neither of them knew they were having that argument about Dad's own retirement fund. I drove to their house at 3 a.m. with all of that in my head. I practiced a look in the rearview mirror. Sad, compliant, defeated. The look of a son who got beat and knows it. If Dad wanted to play the family helps family card all the way to the river, I was going to let him. The house smelled like stale coffee and stress when I walked in. Mom was asleep upstairs. Dad had kept this quiet from her. In the living room, Dad standing by the fireplace in his bathrobe, arms crossed. Brendan on the couch, head in his hands, eyes red-rimmed. Whether the tears were real or performed, I've honestly never been sure. With Brendan, it's usually about 50-50. Dad's fury wasn't directed at the thief. It was directed at the inconvenience of the situation. He ran the whole script. Brendan made a mistake. He's drowning. He's desperate. Look at you, Nolan. You've got the condo, the investments, the promotion. No kids, no debt, And then the one that genuinely floored me. Don't be greedy, Nolan. He actually said that. I'm the victim standing in his living room at 3 in the morning, and I'm being told not to be greedy. I laughed. Dry, quiet, barely audible. And then he hit the real point. If I called the police, Brendan goes to jail. His life is over. Did I want to be the reason my brother had a criminal record? Did I want to break Mom's heart? So what exactly are you proposing? I asked. I just eat the loss? Dad squared his shoulders. Yes, you let it go. Consider it a contribution to saving your brother. He'll pay you back eventually. He said this knowing full well it was a lie. All three of us knew it. I looked at Brendan. He was watching me through his fingers, holding his breath like a kid waiting to find out if he's getting a punishment or ice cream. I looked at Dad, defiant, completely certain he had the authority to redistribute my money because he was the patriarch, and that's just how it worked. Okay, I said softly. Dad blinked. He hadn't expected it to be that easy. You want me to let it go, I said again, slower. Treat this $20,000 as a gift to get Brendan out of trouble. Not seek repayment. Not involve the authorities. That's what you're asking me as my father. Yes, Dad exhaled. Exactly. That's the right thing to do. That's what a good brother does. And you promise, I said, looking him directly in the eye, that we never speak of this money again. Debt is settled, done. I promise. It's buried, gone. I pulled out my phone. Told them I was turning off the fraud alert. I was actually stopping the recording I'd started the moment I walked through the front door. I drove home. I let them think they'd won. Pause for a second. For listeners, this is still the host jumping in, not Nolan. I need a moment here. This man walked into a room at 3 a.m. where his father was actively shielding the guy who robbed him, stayed completely calm, agreed to everything, and recorded the entire thing on his phone. That's not just restraint. That's operating at a different level entirely. Dad thought he was brokering a family peace deal. What he was actually doing was signing a document that would come back to haunt him. And the beautiful part? He was genuinely proud of himself. Anyway, this is where Nolan stops reacting and starts building. The next morning, I felt more awake than I had in months. I called in sick, not entirely a lie, and set up a coffee meeting with my friend Diana. We'd been friends since college. She's a contract lawyer, sharp as anyone I know, and she was the only person outside my family who knew about Dad's secret fund, because she'd helped me put together the original management paperwork, which Dad had refused to sign because, ironically, he didn't want a paper trail. We met downtown at a coffee shop far from anywhere Dad or Brendan might wander. I played her the recording. She listened with her mug halfway to her mouth. When it finished, she set it down. Nolan, she said, this is diabolical. I love it, but you need to cover yourself. You're the custodian of that account. If your dad tries to come after you for negligence or mismanagement, you need documented proof that he authorized this outcome. That's exactly why I'm here. How do I lock him in without tipping him off about the secret? She tapped her pen on the table for a few seconds. Email confirmation. Vague enough not to trigger his paranoia about the fund. Specific enough to identify the transaction. We spent an hour drafting the right email. Subject line. Resolving last night's issue. The body confirmed that per his request, I was canceling any police report regarding the unauthorized transfer of $20,000 from the savings account under my management on April 15th, and that I understood he wanted this treated as family assistance for Brendan, not a debt requiring repayment. I closed it by saying I hoped it helped Brendan get back on his feet. I hit send. 2 hours later, Dad replied, "Thanks, son. Proud of you. Let's move forward. Don't bring it up to your mother." Diana read the reply over my shoulder and gave me a nod. You're legally bulletproof. He explicitly authorized forgiveness of the debt. He thinks he's clearing a balance you're owed. The phrase savings account under my management covers the fund without naming it. That afternoon, I went to the bank, my actual bank, where my personal money lived. I moved everything to a completely different institution, set up two-factor authentication with a hardware key, changed every password I owned, ran a full virus scan, wiped my laptop's hard drive, and reinstalled the operating system from scratch. I scrubbed Brendan's digital fingerprints out of my life entirely. That night, Brendan texted me. "Hey bro, crypto crashed, lost it all. Sorry, but thanks for being cool about it. Dad says you're a hero, lol. Lost it all." Of course he did. There was never a sure thing. He'd either dumped it into a pump and dump scheme or just made the dumbest possible move with it. With Brendan, both options are equally likely. And the LOL. That told me everything I needed to know. He thought he'd gotten away clean. He thought the Bank of Nolan had a no-penalty withdrawal policy. I didn't reply. I made myself a cup of coffee, sat on the balcony, and waited. Because I knew Dad's pattern. He'd ignore the fund for months, let it sit, let himself feel secure. But eventually, he'd want to move it. He'd find some deal. He always did. It took 3 months. Okay, stop. I need to appreciate something about this for a second. Captain Crypto, who has failed at dropshipping, day trading, and influencer content, sent an LOL in his apology text. An actual LOL. What's next? A Yelp review of the heist. 3 stars, the victim was too calm, would rob again. Meanwhile, Nolan's out here quietly rebuilding his entire digital security setup while Dad thinks he's sulking. He's not sulking. He's waiting. Because in 3 months, Dad is going to go looking for his retirement money. And Nolan already knows exactly what that bank statement says. The patience on this guy is something else. Back to the story. Summer rolled in. The silence between me and my family got comfortable, for me at least. I stopped going to Sunday dinners. Told Mom I was buried in work. Dad didn't push it. He probably figured I was still stinging about the money, and honestly, I think he liked that. Fed his ego, thought he'd handled me. July 12th, 10:30 in the morning. Dad called while I was at my desk. He was breathless, excited. He'd found a commercial property, foreclosure situation, desperate seller, cash needed fast. He wanted to pull everything from the fund and wire it directly that evening so he could show proof of funds the next morning. It's the deal of a lifetime, he said. Pull it all. Sure, Dad, I said. I'll be there at 7. I hung up and sat there for a second, listening to the office AC hum. Then I printed out the bank statement for account 4490, slid it into a crisp manila envelope, and put the envelope in my briefcase. I drove over that evening. The house had a festive energy. Mom was out at her book club, which is when Dad always timed these things. Brendan was on the couch eating a pizza, looking completely relaxed. The April incident had clearly become ancient history for him. 0 consequences will do that for a person. Dad greeted me at the door with a wide grin. He handed me a water and started talking about retiring next year, buying a boat, finally doing what he'd always said he would. He was already spending the money in his head before it was even in his hands. All right, he said, rubbing his palms together. Open up the magic box. Let's see the total. With interest, we should be sitting pretty. I set my briefcase on the dining table. Brendan wandered over, still chewing, holding a pizza slice. Can I get a cut for the emotional support? He joked. I didn't smile. I opened the briefcase. I did not take out a laptop. I took out the manila envelope. I didn't bring the computer, I said, but I brought the latest statement. Dad looked confused. Why? We need to transfer it. Read it first. I slid the envelope across the table. Dad picked it up, opened the flap, pulled out the single sheet of paper, adjusted his reading glasses. The silence that followed was thick. You could have wrung it out. Nolan. His voice was suddenly uncertain. Is this a joke? No joke. It says the balance is... He looked up, his eyes wide and glassy. $42.18. Where is the rest? There should be over $20,000 in here. Brendan stopped chewing. He looked at the paper, then at me. The color left his face entirely. It was withdrawn, I said. April 15th. Dad's brow furrowed, his brain slowly connecting dots. It really didn't want to connect. April 15th. That's the... He froze. He looked at Brendan. Brendan's face went the color of curdled milk. He dropped the pizza crust. That was the night Brendan hacked my computer, I said. The night he transferred $20,000 to a crypto exchange. Dad shook his head slowly, like a man trying to solve an equation while the floor was falling out from under him. But that was your money. We agreed. That was your savings account. You assumed it was my savings. I never said that. I kept my voice flat and steady. Brendan hacked the account ending in 4490. That's the account you asked me to open. That's Project T. That's your retirement fund. Dad made a sound I'd never heard from him before. A strangled, high-pitched wheeze. He gripped the edge of the table with both hands. You! He pointed at me, fingers shaking. You let him! You told me to let it go, I said. You told me don't be greedy. You told me family helps family. You told me to write it off as a contribution to saving my brother. I thought it was your money! Dad's voice cracked. He swept the glass off the table and it shattered against the wall. You tricked me. I did exactly what you asked, I said, standing up straight. You insisted I forgive the debt. You sent me an email confirming it. Proud of you, son. Let's move forward. Your words. Dad turned to Brendan. Brendan was already backing toward the doorway. I didn't know, Brendan said. I swear I thought it was his money. I thought he was loaded. You threw my retirement into a crypto scam. It was an accident. You stole from your own father. Wait. Let me get this straight, because this deserves a moment. Captain Crypto, who has failed at every business venture he's ever touched, just accidentally robbed the one account that was quietly protecting his dad's entire retirement. And his defense? I thought he was loaded. That's not a defense. That's a LinkedIn headline. Meanwhile, Dad, who spent years shielding this guy from every consequence on the planet, is now watching his nest egg evaporate in real time in his own dining room on a Tuesday. The man who coined "family helps family" just found out his family helped themselves to his life savings. Beautiful. And we're not done. Dad lunged at Brendan. Not cinematic, just desperate, clumsy, a grab at the collar of his t-shirt. They stumbled into the living room. A lamp went over. I stood in the doorway and watched. I didn't move to intervene, not immediately. Brendan shoved him off. Dad stumbled backward onto the couch, breathing hard, one hand pressed to his chest. I did step forward then. Stop it, I said. Both of you. Brendan was already crying. Real this time. Ugly, full-body crying. The kind you can't fake. He looked at me. Nolan, help me. Tell him it was a misunderstanding. I looked at my brother. The one who'd used me, ignored me, and stolen from me. Always hiding behind Dad the second anything went wrong, his whole life. I can't help you, Brendan, I said. I'm just the greedy one, remember? He ran out the front door. His car started and peeled out of the driveway. Silence settled back into the room. Dad sat on the couch, head in his hands. He looked old in a way I hadn't noticed before. Smaller. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wet. Nolan. He could barely get the word out. Fix this, please. I know you have your own savings. You have to help me. If your mother finds out... Mom isn't going to find out from me, I said. But I'm not giving you a dime. How can you be so cruel? I'm your father. I pointed to the empty doorway. You taught me family helps family. Well, you just helped him. You gave him $20,000 of your own retirement money. You should be proud. That was an extremely generous gift. It wasn't a gift. It was... When I thought it was your money, It only became a theft, I said, when it turned out to be yours. I picked up my briefcase. Where are you going? Panic rising in his voice. You can't just leave. What am I supposed to do? I don't know, Dad. Maybe you should have thought about that before you told a victim to shut up and take it. I walked to the door. Nolan. His voice cracked. If you walk out that door, don't come back. I stopped. Turned around one last time. Dad, I said, you used that threat 3 months ago. It worked then. It doesn't work now. Because I've realized something in the last few months. I don't need you. You need me. And you just lost me. I closed the door behind me, gently. My hands weren't shaking on the drive home. Not even a little. I merged onto the highway feeling lighter than I had in years, maybe decades. Like I'd set down a backpack I'd been carrying since I was a kid and hadn't even noticed the weight until it was gone. The texts and calls started before I hit the first exit ramp. Dad pleading, Brendan panicking. I didn't block them right away. I wanted to watch the consequences actually land. The 20 grand was gone, and I'd known that since April. But sitting there watching the city skyline open up ahead of me, I realized it was the best money I'd ever spent. It bought me something I hadn't had in 34 years. My own life. One more stop before the update, for the listeners. I want to point something out. Nolan didn't yell, didn't threaten, didn't go scorched earth on the whole room. He just walked out. And the exit line, I don't need you, you need me, and you just lost me. Delivered quietly. Zero drama. No performance? That's the most cold-blooded thing I've heard in a long time. Not because it was mean, because it was true, and he knew it, and they knew it, and the door closed gently behind him anyway. Now let's see what 3 years of consequences looks like. Final update. 14 months of no contact. Blocked the unknown numbers. Let the ones I recognized ring to voicemail twice, so they knew I'd seen the call. Then silence after that. I'm not going to tell you it was painless. There's a version of me that mourned the family he wished he'd had. But that version of me also has worse savings and a worse sleep schedule, so we don't let him make decisions. Then Aunt Rita showed up. A Saturday morning in late fall. I was on the balcony with an espresso, watching the city come to life. My building buzzer went off. I checked the intercom and saw a woman in a large sun hat and oversized sunglasses, moving like someone who believed they were being very subtle. It was Aunt Rita, Dad's sister, the family's designated message carrier, an unofficial historian of other people's business. I should have let it ring, honestly. But curiosity is a difficult thing to resist when you've been in the dark for over a year. I buzzed her up. She sat on my white leather couch and looked around the apartment with an expression that somehow managed to be both impressed and offended at the same time. She clutched her purse like it had evidence inside it. "You've done very well for yourself, Nolan," she said. Her tone made it sound like an accusation. I set a coaster down for her water. Didn't offer coffee. Coffee is for guests who are planning to stay. She ran the standard script. I'd abandoned the family, turned my back in their darkest hour. How could I live with myself? I let her finish. "I removed myself from a crime scene," I said. "There's a difference. How are they doing?" She leaned in with the look of someone who'd been saving this news for exactly this moment. Dad had lost the house, the one my parents had lived in for 30 years. After I left that night, he'd become obsessed with the commercial property deal, convinced it was the only way to recoup the loss. He'd put the house up as collateral to secure a hard money loan, put everything he had into it, but the property turned out to have a lien on it he hadn't discovered. The deal collapsed. The investors pulled out. The lenders came collecting, and he had nothing left, because the fund was gone. He was driving for a rideshare app out of a Route 9 motel, telling anyone who asked that he was consulting. Mom had moved into a small apartment near her church. She'd had to resign from the garden club board, which, according to Rita, was actually the more devastating loss. And Brendan? He'd left the state before anyone could serve him anything. Took Dad's car before the bank repossessed it and drove south. Last anyone heard, he was in Florida, waiting tables and dodging subpoenas. Some people were apparently still looking for him, not the kind you call the bank about. Then Rita looked at me directly and delivered what she'd come to say. "Nolan, your father is 70 years old. He's driving strangers around at night to pay for a motel room. Your mother is living on Social Security. And here you are." She gestured around my apartment. "One check from you could get your mother into a nice place. It could get your father off the road." I looked at her for a long moment. "Aunt Rita," I said, "do you know why I didn't call the police that night? Because your father asked you not to. No, because I wanted them to actually learn something. Dad spent his whole life bailing Brendan out with money he was hiding from his wife. He used me as the vault and Brendan as the excuse. When the vault got robbed, Dad's instinct was to protect the thief and silence the victim. If I write a check right now, what happens next week? Does Dad learn? Does Brendan? They've suffered enough," she said. My compassion, I said, was giving them a real choice. Dad chose Brendan over me. He chose to cover a felony over my dignity. He told me to let it go. I stood up, so I let it go. I let them go. I'm not rescuing anyone here. I'm ending the cycle. Rita stood, face flushed. "You're cold, Nolan. Ice cold. Your father was right about you. You care more about money than blood." "No," I said, walking her to the door. I care about peace, and I paid $20,000 for it. I think that's a fair price. She left. I watched the elevator doors close on her expression. I went back to the balcony. There was one loose end I hadn't told anyone about. When Dad set up the fund, he'd promised me 5% of the interest as a management fee. I'd managed the money properly, moved it into high-yield bonds and index funds before Brendan drained the liquid cash. The original principal was what got stolen and lost. But the interest I'd generated over 2 years? I'd swept that into a separate sub-account every quarter, just as clean accounting practice. Brendan hadn't touched it, didn't know it existed. About $8,500. Technically Dad's money, technically my fee, a genuine gray area. But I didn't want a gray area. I didn't want a single dollar of that fund mixed into my new life. I made out a cashier's check to a gambling addiction recovery foundation, sealed the envelope, walked down to the lobby mailbox, dropped it in. Clack. Final. 3 years now. Mom and Dad divorced. Turns out when you lose the house and your wife finds out about the secret fund you'd hidden from her for years, the marriage doesn't survive that conversation. Mom is in a senior community now. We talk occasionally, surface level, carefully. She still blames me a little. She can't fully help it, it's the wiring she grew up with. But she respects the distance. I send her flowers on her birthday. Dad still emails me sometimes. Usually links to investment opportunities or things he's read online. Mason, look at this gold IRA. This one is different. He hasn't changed. He's still looking for the shortcut, still hunting the magic move that undoes 30 years of decisions. I drag them to spam without opening them. And Brendan got arrested in Georgia. Check fraud. Minor charge as these things go, but enough to put him in the system. He called me collect from jail. I stared at the phone for a full minute. Inmate from Brendan. Would you like to accept charges? I pressed decline. That was the hardest moment. Harder than the night of the theft, honestly, because it was the moment I fully accepted I couldn't save him. Dad had spent 30 years trying to save him, and all it produced was a man who believed the world owed him everything without receipt. If I answered that call, I wouldn't be helping. I'd just be the new enabler, the new dad. So I let it ring out. My life now, I got the senior analyst promotion. Salary nearly doubled. My personal investments are up. I'm with a woman named Claire who knows the whole story and, unlike my family, actually respects that I have a line I don't negotiate past. Life is stable, boring in the best possible way. Dad called me greedy that night. He used it like a weapon. But let's be clear about what greed actually is. Greed isn't having savings. Greed isn't wanting justice when someone steals from you. Greed is feeling entitled to take what isn't yours, because working for it seemed like too much effort. Greed is hiding money from your wife for years, and then demanding someone else cover your losses. Greed is asking a person to set themselves on fire, so you can stay warm for 1 more hour. Family helps family is a real thing when it runs both directions. When it only flows one way, it's not a value. It's a collection strategy. I paid $20,000 to learn that. Honestly, best money I've ever spent. So if you're the responsible one, the one who holds the vault, absorbs the impact, gets called greedy for wanting what you earned, remember this. You are not an ATM with a family plan. You're a person. And your security matters just as much as theirs does. I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to draw a hard line with a family member over money? Or been on the other side of one? Drop it in the comments. Look, Nolan's not perfect. He made a calculated decision and let it ride for months while the clock ticked. But here's what I know. A man who robs you and a father who covers for it aren't asking for your compassion. They're asking for your compliance. And the moment you realize you're not obligated to fund someone else's chaos, everything changes. That line he dropped at the door, quiet, no drama. I don't need you, you need me. That's not cruelty. That's a man who finally stopped shrinking. Drop your take in the comments. What would you have done? And if you're not subscribed, hit the button so you catch the next one. Catch the next one. Catch the next one. Catch the next one. Catch the